Well, good morning. Hey, my name is Suzie, and I am one of the pastors here, and I'm super excited to be here. I missed last week because I was tired, and I'm teaching on rest today, so I thought it would be good for me to rest. Just don't want to be hypocritical, you know? Um, but the fact of the matter is, I kind of worked up to this day with a lot of fear and trepidation because I really don't want to be hypocritical. And I am teaching on rest, and you need to know that I am really bad at resting. So Kevin asked me what it looks like to be good at resting and if I know anyone who's good at resting. And I don't think I do, but I do know that I am drawn to restful people. And I'm drawn to people who just have a restful presence. And I think we tend to be people who are constantly trying to create restful environments. And rest is something that's very elusive to all of us, but it's something that we're all longing for. So I'm here today with you, not as an expert, but as a fellow learner. And I really wish that I could tell you that I'm a person who, we wake up every Saturday morning, the Lind family, and we sleep in and enjoy life, and we make coffee really slowly, and we gather the children who are 8 to 18 around the fireplace, and we read the scriptures together, and everyone has something to offer that, and we pray together, and then we go on this glorious hike, frolicking in the wilderness, and being kind to each other, and no one ever fights because God is so present, and we just love each other and love God. Every Saturday we practice the Sabbath that way. That is not reality for us. I'm so sorry. So if you walked into this church today thinking you were going to hear from a pastor who has everything nailed and dialed in, you can go, and I will not be offended if you want to stand up and go. It's totally fine. But I'm here because this is a subject that is hard for me. I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, so I struggle with finding my identity in the things that I do and the things that I do really well. So I really want to nail rest, but I just can't. So, yeah, I think I'm not the only one. I don't feel very alone right now in this room. So I'm excited to be with you in it, and I'm excited to talk with you about it because the rest that I'm talking about today is the rest that we find God speaking about so often in Scripture. And it's not just about a good night of sleep, although that's a really good part of the equation. It's not just about taking a day off or taking time away, but it's the kind of rest that God talks about initially in the Old Testament, and Jesus invites us into with his presence and the way that he lives his life. And what we see is constantly us being invited into this place of rest. This kind of rest is actually a pathway to trust. It's not something we just attain or master or crush, but something that we actually have to strive for, which is really interesting because the word Sabbath, the message is about rest today, not just Sabbath. Sabbath is a big part of it, and we're asked to keep the Sabbath. But the word Sabbath comes from Shabbat, which means to cease striving, to stop striving for your identity, for your worth, for your value, but stop striving for that. But it's interesting because the writer of Hebrews then says, let us therefore strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience as the people of Israel. This kind of thing, because the word Sabbath comes from the word Shabbat, which is what we think of when we think of rest in the church, and when we think of rest in the scriptures, we think of Sabbath, which means to cease striving, but then the human struggle is to strive to cease striving. No wonder we have no chill, right? So the striving of our identity versus I actually have to be intentional striving, and I actually have to make a plan and work at carving out time and creating a space for my soul to rest with God. I long for it, and I'm always learning about myself and how I'm resisting it, and how it, in and of itself, rest is actually a form of resistance, if I let it be. But I have, over the past few years, I've been trying to practice Sabbath. And I'm saying practice because it is a practice. So everybody can take a deep breath that I'm not going to be telling you to do one more thing with your life with God. But it is a practice. It's something that we continue to do until we enjoy it more and more, right? So I've been practicing these rhythms of rest with things like trying to get better sleep. I'm trying to set myself up, like I'm putting myself to sleep at night like I would a child, and turning off my phone earlier and that kind of stuff, and spending time in solitude and silence and not constantly having to have noise around me and stuff. And on Fridays, that's my day that I've kind of set aside as my Sabbath keeping day. So it doesn't always work out though. But this is my current practice, is to try to keep Fridays as a day of rest. But I have found that guarding that day as a day of rest takes a lot of work and a lot of preparation beforehand. I have to strive to get all my work done during the week so that I can keep that Friday as a day of rest. And whatever I don't get done, I have to trust that it didn't need to get done, or that it can just get done later, right? So on a perfect Friday, this is what it looks like. I wake up, I get everybody off to school, and then I might spend some time in solitude and silence. I might spend some time reading scripture. I'm going to read a book that is life-giving to me, not something that I have to read for information or even message prep. And I'll do some writing, because writing is my form of understanding and processing, so I'll do some writing. I might get in some exercise, which is life-giving to my body. I'll visit my mom. I'll make plans to be with a friend who's life-giving. But my number one rule for the perfect Friday of rest is that I don't do anything that I have to do. I don't do anything that I don't. Well, I mean, sometimes you have to do things, right? Let's be honest. But I don't do anything that I don't want to do, right? So I might cook a better meal, because for me, cooking is cathartic. So I might choose something to cook that's going to take me longer to enjoy cooking. But here's the problem that I often encounter on Fridays. And, well, there's a couple problems. But one is that, so I'm a working mother. And sometimes, like during the week, there might be someone or something that needs my attention during a time where I would normally be working. So I might be having to, or getting to, help on a field trip, on a Wednesday morning when I would normally be working. And thankfully, my job is flexible. I have a very understanding boss who makes sure that we prioritize family first. So I'll go on that field trip, and I will talk myself into, well, that was a form of rest. So on Friday morning, I'm going to have to then work because I have to make up for it, right? But, our children and our family lives are definitely, enjoyable and restful at times, but sometimes they are our work, and for a lot of us, they are our work. So the other thing that becomes a problem is during the week, I'm not managing my rest during the week well. So in the name of rest, I'll maybe lay on the couch and numb out on something. And I'll think I'm resting, but really what I'm on social media, I'm watching TV, and I'm being filled with the noise of all the things that contribute to my feelings of inadequacy and underperformance. And then 3, unite. And then I might be, in all that numbing out and stuff, I might be procrastinating on things that I should be doing or getting done, and I end up feeling like I have to do it on Friday because I procrastinated all throughout the week. And sometimes I spend my time doing a lot of really good things that I think I'm supposed to do or that I should do, instead of setting healthy boundaries around my time for the things that I am meant to do. Okay, so I'm going to say that one more time. Sometimes we busy ourselves so much with the things that we think we're supposed to do or should do that we don't have the right boundaries or give the right energy to the things that we are meant to do. So then your day of rest comes along, and rather than resting, you're unsettled because you haven't done the thing that you were meant to do. So strive to cease striving. So I'm not standing up here telling you that I'm super busy, because we're all super busy, right? We identify ourselves with our busyness. We hide behind our busyness. Some of us find our identity in our busyness. And the busyness, somebody's sad right now. The busyness can be numbing, it can be distracting, and it keeps us from looking at our hearts, from being present with our hearts. The busyness keeps us from being present with our hearts, with ourselves, with the people around us, and with God. Because we're not present with what is, we're piling on the distraction of the busyness. I mean, think about it. We ask somebody, hey, how's it going? Oh man, I'm super busy. How are you? Oh, crazy. Life is just crazy. And like when you're teaching, you see everything through the filter of what you're studying and learning and getting ready to teach. So just yesterday, I was at a basketball game for my son, and someone came up to me and she's like, oh, what's keeping you busy? I'm like, nothing. I'm a restful person. What makes you think I'm so busy? Am I giving off the busy vibe? But that's like a badge of honor, is how busy are you and what are you doing? When we meet people, we ask them, what do you do? And we've sort of like put ourselves into this place that our value is found in all the things that we're doing and being and busy with and creating. And the busier you are, the more important you are. Or the busier I am, the more important and of value I feel. Underneath it all, that's really what it is. It's a sense of value. But God is saying, nope. I want you to find your value in resting, in knowing that you're already loved. That even if you don't create anything marvelous or wonderful, you're already loved. God's invitation to rest is more than just a nap. It's more than just time away. It's more than going on a great retreat. It's contented living. It's being content with who we are in Christ as a child of God, because we are a child of God and not anything else. It's not our work. It's not what we create or who we create or how much we achieve. It's contentment in being who we are. So, as Sam said, I went to Brazil, and we went together to Brazil, and I knew that I was a little stressed out about the whole thing, because being gone for a whole week, and honestly, I was really struggling with having to come up with a message on rest and feeling super hypocritical because I was not resting at all or feeling rested, and now I was going to go on this trip. And the thing about going on a missions trip is that you're immediately thrown into a uncomfortable environment. You don't know the people, you don't know the language, you don't know the culture, you don't know the lay of the land. And so you are literally stripped away from everything, and you have to be fully present because it's a matter of survival. So that gift of being present is truly a gift. And it's like God kind of putting you in that place. So if you ever need a time where you're stripped away from everything and you want to know who you are and you want to know what you're good at and what you're gifted in and all that, and you want to feel like a beloved child of God because it's nothing that you've done, go on a missions trip. But we were on this trip, and I knew, okay, I brought all my books and my stuff I was going to study, and there was no way I was going to get to any of it. But I knew that God was going to say something to me about rest, because that's just how he rolls. So this is a picture of me and Lawan. That's my little sponsored child. Isn't he cute? He's 4. He was so excited to meet us all. And we spent a whole day together at this adventure park. So I got to be with him and one of the workers at the center that he goes to, and his mom. The next picture is of him and his mom. That's Patricia. So she's 32 years old. She has Luan and a 6-year-old daughter. She's a widow. Her husband died 3 years ago in a motorcycle accident, and she's unemployed because there's just no work for people like her where she lives. If she's lucky, she gets some jobs cleaning houses and is able to get a little bit of money, but she finds herself often going out into the street and begging people for money because sometimes her daughter will wake up in the night crying because she's hungry and there's no food. This is a reality for her. So as I'm thinking about rest and Sabbath and how hypocritical I could be because I don't faithfully keep the Sabbath, I looked at her and I thought, well, she doesn't get to keep the Sabbath in the way that I'm thinking of keeping the Sabbath. She doesn't get 24 hours to carve out of her schedule, planned, created, and where she can just be with God and others and enjoy her family. She does not get that. So if Sabbath keeping comes to us, if his invitation to rest and the commandment to keep the Sabbath is real and comes to us through the gospel, it has to be as much true for me and for all of us here in Williamson County as it is for Patricia in Brazil, as it is for the person in Honduras and Haiti, everywhere in the world. If it's true, it has to be true for all of us. So maybe we're confused with what rest actually is. When we think about rest, sadly, we think of it in ways that are not necessarily what Scripture says and what it describes as. We confuse it with things that are actually kind of a luxury. And it's self-care in the way people in our context get the privilege of choosing or not choosing. And don't get me wrong, that's our context. We shouldn't despise our context that we're in. This is our reality. But for us, we assume that rest is the same thing as getting enough sleep, doing yoga, having enough downtime or me time, or getting away from it all. And these things may be elements of rest, and they may be important and lead us to a form of rest. But what we're really seeing and talking about here are emotional and environmental states of being. And something that we create ourselves and initiate. And it varies from season to season of life and from what's available to us. But rest in the way God is talking about is not something that we create. It's something that he has already created. And he is inviting us to enter into and participate in and keep and guard and protect, because it's where we hear from him, where we meet him, and where he nourishes us. So there's a story about a prophet named Elijah, who was a prophet during the time of King Jehu. King Jehu was married to a nasty, evil, wicked woman named Queen Jezebel. And we have a story that we're gonna look into about how God meets us in rest, and how easy it is for all of us to get so wrapped up in our successes and failures. We're going to pick up the story when Elijah, he comes through this like crazy showdown where he takes down all these prophets, 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, 800 prophets. He literally slays them. And it starts out with this whole, my God is better than your gods. And he proves it. And there's lots of blood and sweat and violence and fire and great things for you to go read on your own. But we're going to pick up in 1 Kings chapter 19. And after all this happens, the word gets back. King Jehu goes back to Queen Jezebel, and he tells her what happened. And also what the other thing that's important is that there was a famine in the land and a drought, and Elijah prayed for rain, and the rain came. Jehu goes to his wife, and her response is, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. So she sends this message to Elijah, you're done. Like her vengeance and her hunger for his life is fiercer than ever. And so we pick up in with the message, and in verse 3, it says, when Elijah saw how things were, he ran for dear life to Beersheba, far in the south of Judah. He left his young servant there, and then went on into the desert another day's journey. He came to a lone broom bush and collapsed in its shade, wanting in the worst way to be done with it all, to just die. Enough of this, God. Take my life. I'm ready to join my ancestors in the grave. Now, the NIV says, I'm no better than my ancestors. Exhausted, he fell asleep under the lone broom bush. Suddenly, an angel shook him awake and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and to his surprise, right by his head were a loaf of bread baked on some coals and a jug of water. He ate the meal, and he went back to sleep. The angel of the Lord came back, shook him awake again, and said, "Get up and eat some more. You've got a long journey ahead of you." Again, the NIV says, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." He got up, ate, and drank his fill and set out. Nourished by that meal, he walked 40 days and nights all the way to the mountain of God, to Horeb. When he got there, he crawled into a cave and went to sleep. Then the word of God came to him. "So, Elijah, what are you doing here?" "I've been working my heart out for the God of the angel armies," said Elijah. "The people of Israel have abandoned your covenant, destroyed the places of worship, and murdered your prophets. I'm the only one left, and they're trying to kill me." Then he was told, "Go stand at the mountain at attention before God, and God will pass by." A hurricane wind ripped through the mountains and shattered the rocks before God, but God wasn't found in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but God wasn't found in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire, but God wasn't in the fire. And after the fire, a gentle and quiet whisper. When Elijah heard the quiet voice, he muffled his face with his great cloak, went to the mouth of the cave, and stood there. A quiet voice asked, "So, Elijah, now tell me, what are you doing here?" So notice Elijah's answer doesn't change. He says, "I've been working my heart out for God, the God of angel armies, because the people of Israel have abandoned your covenant, destroyed your places of worship, and murdered your prophets. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me." And God says, "Go back the way you came, through the desert to Damascus. When you get there, anoint a new king and go find your successor, Elisha." I can so relate to Elijah. I'm a person who constantly struggles when I compare myself to other people, the ones who have gone before me and the ones who are doing the same thing as me. And when I'm tired, I easily lose sight of joy and contentment and whatever great things I've done in the past, whatever great victories I have in my life. Gratitude begins to erode when I'm overtired. It slips away when I feel like I've failed at something. And like Elijah, my instinct is I just want to run away. Or I think I'll go to bed now. Just want to go to bed. I also kind of understand the heart of God in this. Teenagers are really funny. They have a lot happening in their bodies. We have a house full of them. And, you know, when your kids are little, you put them on a sleep schedule, right? When they're babies, you kind of get things going and you put them on a nap schedule because you know, like if they're overtired, they're not going to eat well. They're not going to play well because they're overtired. And if they're overtired, they actually won't even sleep well. And so then they grow up and then they become these teenagers who are really like their number one goal is to live life on their own and become independent, right? And so in doing that, they get really tired sometimes. And sometimes they may like not make the best decisions. And sometimes they may just like the whole world is crashing down around them and everything's so big and terrible and awful and life is very dramatic. And so one of the things we've noticed with some of our kids is that like you can just tell when they are so tired, you cannot reason with them. I mean, it's like there's nothing you say or do can help. In fact, it could just make it worse. So, you know, you just want to say like, just go to bed. Just go to bed and we'll talk about it in the morning, right? And so it's like God knew Elijah was tired. He was burned out. he wasn't going to hear from him. He even sends these big winds and fires, and he's not going to hear from him until he's rested enough to hear him in the quiet, quiet place. There's a saying that an acronym HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. If you're any of those things, just don't even try to make a decision. Hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Go to bed. And then decide. But I love that James, Jesus' brother in James 5, he describes Elijah as a human being ever as we are. If Elijah was sitting in a counseling session describing everything he was experiencing and feeling, he would have been diagnosed with a classic case of burnout. He was depressed, he was physically exhausted, and everything was being taken over by fatigue and self-pity. Maybe he thought that the huge display of God's power was going to turn Jezebel and Jehu's hearts towards the God of Israel. And instead, their fury and hunger for power and Elijah's death increased. Elijah more than likely felt like a failure. You're a prophet. You have one job: turn the hearts of the people towards God. Maybe he felt that no matter how hard he worked, it wasn't enough. Maybe he felt that no matter how hard he worked, he was not enough. So instead of turning to others for help, instead of instinctively crying out to God and talking to God about it, he isolates himself. He runs away. He leaves his servant behind and takes off by himself. And worst of all, he just wants to die. If you go back and you read a couple chapters and you read more about the story of Elijah, one thing that really stands out is he doesn't do anything without God telling him first. There's always this and the word of the Lord came to Elijah and he did blank. At this point in the story, when he runs away, there's no word of the Lord telling him to do anything. He's going off on his own strength, which often happens when we're tired and depleted. Isn't it crazy how we tend to just kind of grasp for our own strength more than relying on God? So, God. I love the way he responds. He doesn't get angry at him. He doesn't condemn him. He doesn't say, well, if you had come to me first. Or he doesn't shame him for being tired and exhausted and running. Instead, like a parent with a discouraged child, he has pity on him. Oh, Elijah, you're tired. Sleep. Eat. You still have a lot to do, and it's too much for you. You need to eat. You need to rest. God sees beyond our moods and all of our ups and downs and our despair and our depression, and he meets us in those places of deepest need. He wants to meet us in our fatigue. He wants to meet us in our despair. And this story shows us how tenderly and patiently he is with us when we feel like we're out of steam and ready to give up. When Elijah plants himself under the broom tree, God graciously invites him into a deep rest for his body, mind, and soul. He gives him rest for the body. If we don't rest appropriately, you guys, our God-given, God-designed bodies are going to make us rest. I mean, Elijah, you get the sense that he just passed out. He found a tree, laid down, and he just had nothing left, and he passed out. Psalm 23 is such a familiar psalm to us, but have you ever noticed this? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Sometimes before we can be led to a still water, before our souls can be restored, God makes us rest. Have you ever been sick or so caught up in grief or loss that you just can't move, and God he literally will make you lie down sometimes? Have you ever gotten so stressed out in your life that you literally become sick? Or you try to busy yourself so much and distract yourself from your feelings of loss and grief and loneliness, and you finally run out of steam from running, and then you feel like you've been taken out physically. The work of healing comes to us in places of rest. Anytime you have a cold or a flu or a headache, we're told to go rest. You just want to go sleep because the healing comes through rest. Sometimes illnesses get so bad that doctors have to put us in medically induced comas so that we will rest, so that the energy of fear and worry and pain and wounding can then go to a healing place when we are asleep. Sometimes we forget that being made in the image of God is having a physical body in which God chooses to reveal himself to us. He speaks to us about our lives. He teaches us through our physical bodies. Sometimes when we're sick and tired, our bodies are screaming at us to slow down and notice God and pay attention to where we've forgotten who he is and who we are. You can feel it in your shoulders. Do you ever have that moment where you're like, oh, I've been like this all day? The fact that the human body was designed to require sleep is the physical manifestation of Jesus pretty much telling us to not worry about tomorrow because tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has trouble enough of its own. God also invites Elijah into a deep rest for the mind. When he goes into the cave, he asks Elijah the question, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" God's asking him this question because Elijah is so locked up in his head with self-pity that when God wants us to rest our minds, it's because our minds are so connected to our egos. His mind, his answer came out like what's in his head was locked up to his ego and what had just happened. We do a lot of work in our heads. When Proverbs says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, it's because so often we're locked up in our heads and our heads are directly tied to our egos. But that's not to say that when we trust God, when we follow God, when we put our rest in God, that we're checking our minds at the door. Absolutely not. We're told to renew our minds and not conform to the patterns of this world. What are the patterns of this world? Hustle, hustle, hustle. Grind. Be busy. Achieve. Look this way. Do this. Accomplish this. The patterns of this world that praise us for being busy and hustling and grinding until we've been found worthy for what we've done. Elijah's stuck in his head. His answer doesn't change. And God tells him to go on the mountain, pay attention to God. But he doesn't go through the hurricane, through the fire. He doesn't go until he's quieted down and he hears the still small voice of God. And he finally moves a position. And he goes out on the mountain. And God asks him again, "What are you doing here, Elijah? Tell me again. What are you doing here?" And his answer doesn't change. But what we see happening next is that his disposition changes. The situation hasn't changed. His feelings haven't changed. But he's able to show up in that quiet place with God and be present with what is. He's able to speak his truth. He's able to go from everything that's in his head to his heart. I've been working with everything that's in me. There's been blood, there's been sweat, there's been a lot of tears, and I'm tired and I'm afraid and they're trying to kill me. He speaks the truth of his circumstances and how he's feeling, and he's able to be so present with that, and then he's able to listen. He's no longer running. He's no longer hiding. He's showing up and facing it and letting God speak to him. And he's able to get instruction and find the courage again to do the next right thing. Go back the way you came, Elijah. Go anoint a new king. Go find your successor. And through this, Elijah finds rest for his soul. Rest for the soul isn't everything being great and perfect and happy and a ride on a pink flamingo. Rest for the soul is being present with what is, and more importantly, knowing that God is present with you in it. God is always inviting us into rest. And we can set weekly dates on the calendar for it and create restful environments and do things that lead us into rest. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that we were made for a purpose and meant to thrive in that purpose from a place of rest. In Genesis, it says, on the sixth day, God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them, and blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth, rule and subdue it. God saw all that he made, and it was so good. And on the seventh day, the first full day, after all the work was finished, he rested. He blessed that seventh day, and he made it holy. The creation narrative tells us that we're made to work and create and lead and rule and subdue the earth, but first, rest. The first full day after mankind was made was a day of rest. Before they went out to work and rule and subdue, first rest. Work from a place of rest. Create from a place of rest. Lead from a place of rest. Jesus says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Come and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Jesus not only invites us into rest, but he models it with his disciples. In Mark chapter 4, he's on a boat and a big storm comes and the disciples are freaking out. What's Jesus doing? Sleeping. He was taking a nap and he didn't apologize for it. He didn't say, oh, I'm sorry, guys. Sorry, I fell asleep. No, he needed rest. Through solitude and silence, God invites us into rest through solitude and silence. There are so many places in the Gospels where we see Jesus modeling this, but in Mark 1:35, after ministering to others and pouring himself out again and again, Jesus leaves everyone and spends time with God. It says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And like the next verse is someone coming and finding him and interrupting him. So all you young moms who don't feel like you have time to rest and time for yourself, it doesn't need to be an hour or a whole day, even 5 minutes. And let a child come and interrupt you and see how you're modeling rest like Jesus modeled rest for his children. After John the Baptist's death, they were sad, they were discouraged. And it says then, because so many people were coming and going that they didn't even have a chance to eat, Jesus said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and let's go get some rest. Jesus knew that the disciples were physically and mentally and emotionally exhausted, too busy to even attend to their own physical needs. It was time to withdraw and rest. My Fridays are my attempt to keep the Sabbath. For me, Saturday is a day of family and sports and birthday parties and driving around. And Fridays are the day that I make every effort to cease striving and practice being with Jesus for a full day. And when I say practice, it doesn't always work out. I don't get it right every week. But I'm striving to cease striving. And maybe you're like me and you're not very good at resting. Maybe you fall asleep easily and you make time for good and healthy self-care, but you still don't feel rested. Consider this an invitation to join me in this practice. Maybe you start with just a half a day, or maybe it's an hour twice a day, or 20 minutes here and 20 minutes there. But the important thing is that you are intentional, that you carve it out, that you make space for it, that you clear the things that, as much as you can, you clear the things that are going to distract you from being able to enter into the rest. When Jesus was being criticized for not keeping the Sabbath by the religious people, he said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Sabbath wasn't created for you to have something extra to do or to prove yourself. It was made for you. It's already been made for you to enter in. I love what Dr. A.J. Svoboda says in his book, The Dusty Ones. He says, a Christian does not see Sabbath as a period of time. Sabbath for a Christian is a way of life. All of life for a Christ wanderer is a Sabbath. All of life is one big period of rest. Not rest from the day job or rest from responsibilities, but rest from striving, from saving ourselves, from all of that. I'm going to invite the band to come back up. But I want us to take a few moments and just practice, just rest right now in this space that we find ourselves in. And we have communion set up today in the back and in the front, and in the overflow we have a table set up. But this table that we're invited to come to often with these very, very common elements of bread and wine, in our case, juice. These elements serve as this reminder of this beautiful and complete rest that we're invited into with Jesus. His body given to us, the blood of the new covenant poured out for us so that we can have a taste of rest. We go to the table reminded of who we are and who he is and what's already been done for us, what we're already invited into. It's a taste of the eternal rest that comes with being in Jesus. So if you just close your eyes for a moment, plant your feet on the ground, maybe straighten your back and notice how that feels. And you might put your palms up in your lap as a form of receiving, or you might place them down because you need to feel more grounded. But let's start by taking 3 deep breaths and get in touch with yourself in the presence of the one who created you. Notice the places of tension in your body. And if just taking 3 deep breaths releases tension. What feels tired? What is your body telling you that lacks energy? Does something hurt? Notice what is going through your mind in response to hearing about rest. Is it a longing? Is it a craving? Is it resistance? What are you doing here? This is how we take our thoughts captive. We make them obedient to Christ in rest. Father, as we sing our prayers, as we take this space carved out to be with you, God, make your presence known to us. Today we celebrate communion. It's a celebration because there's a lot to celebrate when we can tell the truth that we can't do this on our own. We need you even for our rest, and that bread, that juice, it reminds us again and again and again that we cannot do it without you, God. We love you, and right now we want to be with you.